If the money just landed in your account, why does it seem to disappear faster than on any other day of the month? Have you noticed how payday, which should bring relief, often comes with a strange feeling of losing control? That feels normal, but it isn't. Almost no one stops to look closely at this detail, and that's exactly where the game starts to change. There's a behavior that only shows up when your balance goes up. Not in the middle of the month, not at the tight end, but right on the first day when everything should be under control. Payday isn't neutral. It triggers something automatic, quiet, almost invisible, that leads smart people to make decisions they can't even explain a few days later. Have you been there? That string of small expenses that seem harmless on their own, but together leave an uncomfortable question hanging in the air. How did it already add up to this? What makes it more dangerous is that none of it feels wrong in the moment. On the contrary, it all feels justifiable, deserved, even logical. The brain reads a higher balance as permission, not responsibility. Almost no one notices this because it doesn't shout and it doesn't hurt right away. But the effect shows up quickly, always in the same place. That feeling that the month barely started and it already feels too expensive. If this sounds familiar, stay with me, because understanding what really happens on that first day completely changes how you see the rest of the month. And maybe what's most interesting is realizing that when this happens, a lot of people assume the problem is personal, as if it were a lack of discipline or a flaw in character. But when you look at it more honestly, you start to see the same pattern showing up again and again in many people. If, while listening to this, you caught yourself thinking of similar moments, it's worth sharing in the comments what stood out to you most, or where you recognized yourself. That kind of exchange matters, because it shows this isn't an isolated issue and helps this conversation reach others who are going through the same thing in silence. A simple like here also signals that this topic matters and deserves space, and subscribing to the channel is a way to keep exploring these kinds of behaviors more deeply, without easy judgments. Because once you understand what really happens on that first day, you start to see that the month doesn't spin out of control by accident. It already starts differently from the very beginning, and that's exactly where we need to look more closely. When the money comes in, something shifts almost instantly, and it's not in your pocket, it's in your head. The brain makes a quiet adjustment, as if it's recalculating what's now acceptable. Before, certain choices felt like too much. After payday, they start to sound normal. This doesn't happen because you lost control, but because the reference point changed. The bigger number in your balance becomes a new baseline, and decisions that would have been postponed suddenly feel justifiable. A slightly more expensive lunch doesn't bother you anymore. Small purchases stop feeling small, and expenses that would have required a pause just slide through without friction. That feels normal, but it isn't. The most uncomfortable part is realizing that in that moment, the brain isn't thinking about saving. It's thinking about a new limit, not protection, but permission. The mindset shifts without warning, and almost no one notices this backstage of decision-making. The hidden truth is that spending patterns don't follow need, they follow the visible balance. That's why organized, informed, and responsible people repeat the same cycle. It's not financial ignorance. It's a predictable mental reflex wired to respond to immediate signals, not future consequences. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because once you understand this mechanism, you start to see the real impact of payday as the beginning of a very specific journey, where each choice feels too small to matter, yet all of them move in the same direction. The shift happens when you realize you're not failing, you're reacting, and automatic reactions, when they go unnoticed, end up making decisions for you. That's how the month quietly becomes expensive, without noise, without obvious guilt, just with the feeling that something slipped through the cracks. If this is sounding familiar, leave a comment saying, "This makes sense to me." There's a very specific moment when the tone of your thinking shifts, and it almost always comes with a simple but powerful inner phrase: "I deserve it." On payday, that idea shows up before there's even any real exhaustion from the month. You haven't faced the challenges ahead yet, but you already feel like you've held back enough, been responsible for long enough, and now you can ease up a bit. It feels harmless, even fair, but it hides an important truth. That sense of deserving doesn't show up as a reward after the effort. It shows up as a trigger before the journey even begins. That's when emotion quietly steps in. Spending stops being a practical decision and becomes a way to regulate built-up tension, frustrated expectations, or even a sense of emptiness that has nothing to do with the thing being bought. It's not about needing it. It's about feeling something different in that moment. The mindset shifts without warning, and decisions that once felt rational start carrying an emotional weight almost no one notices. The impact doesn't show up right away because the relief is immediate, but it spreads through the rest of the month and asks for its price later. The point here isn't to demonize spending. Spending itself isn't the problem. The problem is when spending turns into an automatic emotional tool used to compensate before there's even real effort to be compensated for. That realization tends to feel uncomfortable because it touches identity. No one likes to think they're running on autopilot, but recognizing it is part of the shift because it shows this isn't about personal weakness. It's about a predictable pattern operating behind the scenes of your decisions. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because once you see how early that "I deserve it" shows up, you start to notice how small emotional choices quietly build an entire journey without you realizing it. And that awareness opens space to look more clearly at what happens right after that first impulse. If this hit close to home, leave a comment at the end saying, "I do this without realizing it." After that first impulse passes, almost no one notices what's really happening. There's no big expense that jumps out, no obvious mistake that creates immediate guilt. What shows up instead is something far quieter and more dangerous, a string of small decisions that feel too harmless to deserve attention. A slightly pricier coffee, a quick purchase because it was on sale, a food, delivery ordered without much thought. On their own, none of these feel alarming. The problem is the combination, and especially the timing of when all this happens. Payday makes the brain more permissive, more flexible, less critical. Decisions are guided by a sense of comfort, not by the reality of the entire month. And this happens before the month has even really begun. You haven't faced surprises yet. You haven't dealt with real pressure, but you've already given up margin. This is where the hidden truth shows up. Financial strain rarely comes from one big impulsive expense. It grows out of this invisible sequence, piling up in the first few hours when everything feels under control. The impact only shows up later. As the month moves on, the feeling isn't that you did something wrong, but that you were caught off guard, as if the money just didn't stretch. But it stretched exactly as far as you allowed it to. The pattern repeats because it doesn't look like a pattern. It feels like bad luck, high living costs, or timing. Yet when you look closer, you realize the month is already compromised from the start, not because of low income, but because of decisions made too early, at the moment when your mindset was most relaxed. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because once you understand that the game is lost in the first few hours, you start to see that it's not the end of the month that needs control, but the beginning. This is where things get uncomfortable, because it shows the problem isn't where most people are looking. If this clarified something for you, leave a comment at the end saying, "This makes sense to me." When all of this starts to make sense, a quiet shift happens in how you see Payday. It stops feeling like an isolated event and starts revealing something deeper, a ritual. Not a conscious plan, but an automatic sequence of actions that repeats every month, almost always in the same way. The money comes in, the mindset changes, the decisions follow a familiar script, and as long as that ritual stays intact, the end of the month never really changes. That's the part that feels most uncomfortable, because it dismantles the belief that the problem is external, the amount coming in, the bills, bad luck. The hidden truth is that this isn't about earning more or clenching your teeth with sheer willpower. If it were just that, effort would be enough. The real impact comes from the very first choices made right after the balance shows up. They happen quickly, almost without awareness, and they set an emotional tone that carries the rest of the journey. Payday has turned into an automatic gesture, repeated without reflection, and automatic rituals have a powerful way of shaping outcomes without asking permission. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because once you start observing that ritual, you realize it operates behind the scenes, far away from spreadsheets and obvious advice. It sets the tone for the month, before any surprise even shows up. And that's exactly why so many people feel like they've tried everything, and still end up in the same place. Real change begins when you question not how much you earn, but what you do in the first few minutes after the money comes in. If the problem starts with the ritual, that's where the change has to start too, and that realization opens a new path, one that doesn't rely on guilt or empty promises, but on paying attention to what almost no one looks at. If this idea keeps echoing for you, leave a comment at the end saying, "I'm on this journey too." If you've made it this far, it's because something in this conversation really reached you. Maybe it was a single line, maybe a specific memory, or maybe that uncomfortable feeling of recognizing a pattern that's always been there but never had a name. If it resonates with you, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me." That's not just showing up. It's a way of saying this reflection went deeper than the surface. A simple like here also helps keep this kind of conversation alive, because it signals that these quiet truths are worth talking about. And if you want to keep going on this path of clarity and change, subscribing to the channel is simply saying, "I want to keep understanding how my decisions really work." There's a video right here that connects directly with this topic. Click it and keep going with me, because this story still has important layers to uncover.